Have you ever been baffled by the gap of what people say and what they actually do? Chances are you've encountered situations where individuals express certain beliefs, intentions, and promises, but their actions tell a completely different story. This incongruity can be both confusing and frustrating, especially for those with anxious attachment style who value consistency and relatability in relationships. In those cases, I'm no better than you at figuring out the why behind the discrepancy. But I do have a pretty good handle on a couple of theories that might explain what's happening when people act inconsistent to what they say. Prior to investigating what prompts the inconsistency between people's words and actions, it's important to understand that people with this attachment style often crave closeness and reassurance from their partner and tend to be highly attuned to any signal of inconsistency or potential abandonment. Those with anxious attachment style are also extremely attuned to anything that might suggest that their partners aren't being true to them. This sort of sensitivity, almost akin to a sixth sense, can make them particularly susceptible to feeling unsettled when they perceive a gap between what others say and what they do. Think back to a moment where you heard someone advocate for a cause, only to later see them act in a way that went against the very principles for which they were advocating. This can be a jarring experience for someone with anxious attachment style. Our attachment style encourages us to see people as either predictable and trustworthy, or as what psychologists would call good enough, which is a rather low bar seen for what it is, a way to get through the day. You may have encountered coworkers who endlessly profess their devotion to their job, yet produce work that fails to measure up. It happens so often, you might even think of it as a workplace archetype. And if you're someone who has anxious attachment style, this mismatch in professed value and daily practices can be totally unsettling. You want to feel secure in your workplace relationships, after all. And from the angle of exploring the human condition, we can see three basic elements that lead to this occurrence. First is unconscious priorities. People often operate from these unconscious priorities that may differ from the ones that they express consciously. This could stem from a lot of things: the pull of society, personal insecurities, or hidden motivations. For example, some individuals might advocate passionately for a cause because the cause aligns with their ideal self-image, yet some might act in a way that clearly illustrates fear or insecurity that prevents them from truly committing to these causes. The second one is behavioral change. And although our culture prizes individuality, we can't ignore the power of societal forces that encourage certain behaviors, especially on those of us who are natural rule followers. And whether it's joining a cause, working hard, or playing by the rules, there's a lot of compass pointing in the same direction going on. The third one is self-image alignment. So consider what happens when our attachment styles are not securely formed. For individuals with insecure attachment who also have a self-image that is not securely aligned, empathy can be a little bit of a struggle. This is especially true when the attachment style is anxious and the individual perceives inconsistencies between what others say and what they do. One more is validating your feelings. Human beings have a hardwired need for consistency, especially in close relationships. Anything less than that usually results in the kind of otherwise unnecessary emotional distress that people with anxious attachment style seem to find themselves in over and over. Whether that inconsistency is something being done or in something that supposedly being felt but isn't being shown, it leads to a kind of cognitive dissonance that triggers a search for these misleading explanations. Observing and analyzing patterns. Rather than immediately responding to a person's inconsistent behavior, be more like Sherlock Holmes and methodically observe and study the person's behavior over time. Look for consistent behavior, not just nearly consistent behavior. If your significant other can't do it consistently and has to fake it for a while to get by, then that is a huge red flag. Emphasizing self-alignment. In a world where authenticity and transparency are cherished, upholding these values in our interactions is essential. Authenticity creates trust and allows for the kind of connection that makes it easy for one to express oneself. There is a comfort in predictability, and with attachment, there is a primal drive towards safety and survival. If we can't trust someone to be authentic with us, we have no basis for a stable relationship. As much as we might be tempted to operate in this safe mode, we have to fight against the urge not only in ourselves but also in the space that we create for others. Behaving as if our values currently align with those of society when they don't is anti-therapeutic. And yet this is the kind of pressure we face if we let society be a counterforce in our quest for genuine expression. When anxious attachment individuals feel societal pressure, there is insecurity and fear of abandonment that can become intensified. This can lead to them behaving in a way that might seem somewhat inauthentic. Anxiously attached people might say yes when they really mean no, or faking a smile when they don't really want to smile. If a person's attachment style can influence their external behavior, then it also stands to reason that it can influence their internal behavior, the way they might think about or feel about a certain situation. Some strategies exist for nurturing this authenticity in your interactions with others. The first is to establish unambiguous boundaries. Boundaries setting is important. You need to take inventory of your own needs and in what context you feel like you need to maintain your boundary. Communicating these boundaries to others when the situation really calls for it. It's true that actions generally have more meaning than words, but in the realm where both come together is the space of true authenticity. And for someone with anxious attachment style, this pursuit of the space between the words and the actions, of harmony between the two, is a journey in the direction of greater emotional security and relational calmness. Understanding why people say one thing but do another, while supporting your own feelings of worth and right to interpret, is the map you'll use to navigate this uncertain territory. So the next time you come across a mismatch, you'll have better insight into understanding the story and therefore have better judgment. Take what I just said and marry it to this. Your sensitivity is a strength. And this goes double if you're in the business of building relationships in any capacity, which in my view makes you contribute and shape a world in which trust and authenticity are even more relevant and apparent. When people say one thing but do another, it can be especially hard on those with an anxious attachment style because it activates all of the fears and insecurities that run very deep and are hard to face. But if you take a step back and try to understand what causes this not so pleasant discord and then develop a few key strategies for dealing with it, you can put yourself on the path to cultivating true, trustworthy connections. It's not so much about avoiding the feelings of anxiety because sometimes you just can't. It's about doing the work to understand why you feel it, what it says about you and your relationships, and how to reframe it to make it a little less potent and a little bit more manageable.